Welcome to I've Never Read Discworld, and a really joyful episode where we're going to be looking at book number 12, which is Abroad, which is which is my first time reading this.
Indeed, welcome, welcome. That's the voice of Andy Luke. This is PJ Hart, and I am unsure as to whether this is my first time reading this book. I'm fairly sure it's my first time finishing it. So it's been a real eye opener for me. Really interesting read for both of us, I think, Andy. Would you say?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm so blessed to be reading this. Just you mentioned voice a minute ago. So I just want to flag up some of you can see us. This podcast also has a video component on YouTube and Spotify, but you can find the audio all over the place. There's soon to be defunct Google Podcasts, which will be, I think, YouTube for music. So that's
Oh
not a
God,
great
really?
example. Stitcher, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Amazon, Apple, Audible. So, yeah.
There you go. Another service killed by Google. Who knew? Well, I mean, to the surprise of no one, I suppose. So everybody knew.
Um, so we're looking at Witches Abroad, still 1991, you said just before we came on, published
Yeah,
by Victor Galans.
I feel like we've read like at least four books in the 90s. Is that right? I mean, I guess he did have that kind of two books per year schedule at this
Yeah,
height.
it
So,
definitely feels like more than that at this point. I haven't run the numbers, but
yeah, I guess two books in 90, two books in 91, maybe. I don't, yeah, but it feels like we've been in the 90s for like 6 months already. But this is where we're really mining the deep vein now, aren't we? Like really quality entries in the series, time after time. I
uh,
know you had a lot of fun with this one.
yeah, I got uh, the video readers can see that PJ's got his hats.
My witch's hat is back. I can't. Was it for Equal Rights, which was about a year ago now, probably for Equal
Yeah,
Rights. I think it made its first appearance. So yeah, last Halloween. So yeah, about a year ago.
I've got
So yeah,
a very nice witch's
Pur-
hat festooned with skeletons and spider webs. I've got um, I've got a claw. I've got my claw all over this book.
oh wow,
Um, I've got a
that
frog.
was a
Oh, a frog
real.
that literally just hopped off my finger. And
These are great
I've
props.
got a wand that also doubles as a cigarette holder.
My goodness, he's outdoing me on the props this time. I just have my trusty glass of absinthe, which has to come out for all the witches books. And we finally remembered why in this book, but we'll get to that, I suppose.
My coffee loaded with Jack Daniels and orange.
Festive, very festive.
And I've got my Rolly at hand, therefore breaking the Guild of Podcasters rules. But hey, it's Pratchett.
We're
Gotta have
strapped.
it.
We're strapped in. We're ready to go. Brilliant. Yeah. So as you say, Victor Galan's 1991. Do you want to give us the blurb?
After the back blurb, yeah. It seemed an easy job. After all, how difficult could it be to make sure that a servant girl doesn't marry a prince? But for the witches, Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Ogg, and Magrat Garlic, travelling to the distant city of Genua, things are never that simple. Servant girls have to marry the prince. That's what life is all about. You can't fight a happy ending, at least up until now. Terry
Indeed.
Pratchett is simply the best humorous writer of the 20th century. Brendan Wignall, Oxford Times, and cover illustration by Josh Kirby. Wignall's quote is very apt for this book.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah, it's a good blurb. Some of them are a bit more hookier or a bit more like scant on details, I guess. Whereas this one feels like it's kind of getting into it. It's telling you what to expect, and more so maybe than some of the others. And I wonder, there's like quite a lot going on in this in some respects, in that there's like the whole journey, and then there's the whole Genua story. So it's almost like there's like there's what I mean. There's the holiday story, and then there's the arrival kind of. It's like what happens once they get there, kind of thing. So yeah, it's probably not an easy book to write a blurb for. So well done, whoever at Victor Glance Publishing managed that one.
Do you have any feelings on Josh Kirby's cover?
Um, Hold it up to the screen there for me. It's been a while since I looked at it. Yeah, I mean, part of why I don't probably have a really clear memory of the first time I read these books is that I think the covers of them maybe did put me off a little bit at the time, like the portrayal of the witches. And I had this like mixed up idea in my head of which one was which for such a long time. Like I thought the fat one was Granny and the skinny one was Nanny for like a decade at least. So I wonder if that, I mean, that's just me obviously being a silly kid, but I think part of it is just comes from how busy those covers are. So yeah, I don't think they really help in automatically endear you to characters. Those covers, they're more like for the spectacle of like what crazy stuff is going on in this book.
Right, right, because
You know
this
what I
is
mean?
like it's a quest in the same way the first two books were. Eric Faust is another one.
Yeah, yeah.
So you've got the quest portrayed. You've got Mrs. Gogol's hut and various parrots and snakes, but the witches don't really speak to the character. You've got the nice pipe in the mouth, but yeah, to my mind, Granny is she's a brick. She's built like a mountain.
Yeah, it's interesting because like that's the way her personality always comes across, but like every physical description of her isn't that? And I think that is part of the confusion for me, or it certainly was when I was younger, trying to create like a mental image of her, because like the force of will and her force of personality is meant to be kind of juxtaposed with her like physical nature. I guess she's meant to be kind of small and wiry and stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm really glad I'm rereading the Witches books now. Like back in my first reading of a lot of these early books, like I was put off the Witches and put off the Death books a little bit. I think just because they weren't as accessible, maybe, especially as like the City Watch books were. So yeah, this has been great. Lots of good stuff going on in this book that I think I definitely would have just bounced off of the first time around. In fact, that's my first impression. I guess my original first impression from like whatever, 25 years ago, let's say. So it'd be cool to get yours.
Oh well, have you? I was about to ask you to give away your age here, but this would have been teenage years when you first read it.
Well, yeah, as I say, because I'm struggling to have a distinct recollection of this exact book, but I was consuming or trying to consume quite a lot of them like first and second year of school. So when I was like 11, 12, and then I remember definitely getting those from the library, but then starting to buy some of my own versions when I was like, got a little bit more pocket money or whatever when I was like 13, 14, going into Virgin Megastore in Belfast. And I remember you could get a Discworld soft cover for like £6. It's cheaper than Waterstones, so sorry, apologies to Waterstones. But that's my recollection of like how I got my hands on the books, but like exactly which ones I got my hands on and when is like a little blurry.
Um, so as I said when we were talking about this prior to reading it, I felt it was going to be a really good one, so I went in quite open, and yeah, I love it. What
You put a,
what
you put
I
a heart
noticed,
emoji on the notes. I feel like that's worth mentioning on our
yeah,
notes for the podcast. There's a heart emoji.
yeah. So as I was reading the first half of it, I noticed that I think for 150 pages, very little of plot actually happens. It's just the witches having little side adventures, side missions that are really just, they don't really contribute to the big plot in the last 150 pages around Lilith, and that's okay. In fact, that's brilliant. It's I guess this is what they call plot by character, in that it's all it's all told through their mischief and their relationships with each other and the people around them. I laughed in public like 14, 15 times reading this, it's just crammed every like trying to get literal with it. You could look at 2 pages and you could find something, there'll be something there to laugh about. That be fact. Um
Yep, totally, totally. And you know that like I'm usually pretty on it when it comes to like tight plotting and stuff like that. That's those are the things that excite me in writing usually. But I actually agree with you on this one that like the pace of the holiday portion, what I think of as the holiday portion of the book, where they're basically on holiday on their way to Genoa, is really good. And you're right, you're totally right. It's the character dynamic between the three of them feels much more assured, and it's the bristling, the kind of the conflict bristling between Granny and Magrat is what makes it. It's what drives it, and it feels coherent because that all pays off massively when they get to Genoa. So so there is coherency there. So even though it feels like two really separate sections, and yeah, you can just really feel him, taking a step back. Usually when I read your blurbs or when you read out your little summaries, I'm like, whoa, there's a lot happening there. But like this is a lot more deliberately paced, even though it does have these two sections. It does feel like a lot more deliberately placed than some of the other ones where there's just like crazy stuff happening every 10, 15 pages. So yeah, it's a nice step in the right direction, I think, in terms of pacing.
Yeah, the Magrat Granny conflict really does drive. In one case, creates one of my favorite scenes in the book, which we'll talk about. There is there is a plot where Terry is building towards. He's got in the Grimm brothers. He's got in Aesop's fables. It's kind of a mixtape in for fairy stories, in the same way that Weird Sisters was a mixtape for Shakespeare. So it's quite well done, but it's also kind of quite subtle until it's on top of you as a first time reader. Like looking back, it's pretty obvious, and yeah, there's one I want to talk about in a minute regarding that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that like I'm in this world, and it actually almost put me off it a little bit when I picked the book up again, and it's like, oh man, it's like reimagined fairy tale stuff. I feel that like because I've got two little girls, that like a lot of the content I'm forced to consume through them is like there's like all these kid shows that are like reimaginings. There's like a high school where like all the fairy tale characters go to a high school called I think it's called Enchanted High or something like that. And like obviously all the Disney stuff are all plays on these stories. So I was like, oh man, like when I want to sit down and read a book for my own enjoyment, I don't necessarily want it to be more like fairy tales and princesses and stuff, even if it is reimagined. But I got over that fairly quickly. It is done really well.
So shall we move straight to the synopses?
Certainly.
Um, we've kind of gone by the first 60 pages. So part one: Lilith of Mirrors, Magrat, a fairy godmother, departures, the Dwarf King's mines, and pumpkins.
I did now, yeah, I sort of alluded to it there a second ago, I guess. I did find this opening it took me a little while to warm up to it. I think by the end of this section, I was probably on board, but like, even just like the initial kind of conceit of like, okay, so if you're a witch, you can also be a fairy godmother. Like, I felt that came kind of out of nowhere. Like, I know that anything can happen on the disc, and that's kind of fine, but like, I didn't feel like those two concepts, like the witches and the fairy godmothers, that they've felt like a really natural meld. But like it's the story engine, once Magrat has the wand, like so much great conflict comes out of that between her and Granny that it's fine. But initially I was like, oh, yeah, does that work together? I'm not sure. So it took me a little minute to warm up to that. But once they were on the go, you know,
Might be jumping ahead to say this, but there's Desiderata's strict instructions for Magrat to go alone and not tell the other witches, which is something that we don't see her regret this once she's on the road. Um, think if I remember rightly, she didn't want them to find out about it initially, but once they were in the loop, it was not something that was brought up in the many conflicts she has with Granny.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I wonder did she realize it? Because I think it's clear that that's headology, isn't it? You know, because she's saying that knowing that if she tells Margaret not to tell the other witches and not to let the other witches come, then that guarantees that they will. So it's
Oh yeah,
total reverse psychology. So I wonder does Margaret like she realize that, and so that's why she doesn't throw it back in Granny's face because she sort of knows that she's been used. You know.
right, right. There is that suggestion. There's a lot of stuff before they leave the Ramtops.
Mm.
Uh, it's just conversations between Nanny Ogg and Jason,
Yeah,
who's a big part of the book. Let's not forget.
it's great to see a bit more Jason, and the letters to Jason are really good the whole way through as well. Um, yeah, Jason has a good line about them making sure that the animals that they encounter don't go extinct. Isn't that what it is?
Nanny Ogg would fit right in with EastEnders, or I mean, it is a perfect example why sci-fi and fantasy should be utilized by soap opera.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm not like that. Well, we maybe don't want to get ahead of ourselves with the episode that we have upcoming where we talk about our dream casting and stuff. You know, like there's a lot of kind of working class British actors in our repertoire, and I think you know that's the reason for that, isn't it?
Right, right. You expressed when we were talking about Weird Sisters that you didn't really know. Certainly, Margaret didn't have a firm identity in the same way that Granny and Nanny did. Did you find that changed over the book? I certainly did.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, for sure. And that having that room in the kind of the first half, the holiday section, for that to develop, for like she's got something. All of a sudden, Margaret has something that the other two more powerful witches don't have, and that they potentially want, and how that changes the dynamic between them, and this kind of recurring refrain of Margaret being a kind of a wet hen, and her kind of wanting to break out of that and to be her own person with her own agency is, yeah, that's what this whole section. Well, I mean that carries the whole way through the book, obviously, but just giving her that journey to go on is really relatable, I think, it's great that it's at the center of the entire story as well. So I think it works great. Yeah, it's a lot more kind of love for Margaret in this book for sure for me.
So I was wondering if the Margaret Granny relationship here is picking up on some of the themes of equal rights. I was been a little disappointed that we haven't seen Esk as the first woman, the first girl in the unseen university, and Granny as a sort of a roving lecturer there. I'm wondering if the relationship with Margaret is like there's an element of aged up esque and continuing that theme of Nanny trying to or Granny trying to teach the younger generation.
Yeah, for sure, and it's taking all my willpower not to tell you how long it takes to see Ask again, but
Oh, yeah.
it's a really long time.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean the ages and the circumstances wouldn't necessarily work with that character. So yeah, if you want to have Granny continue in that kind of mentorship role, yeah, like you say, you need a sort of aged up analog for that character. So you've got Margaret, and I think this is the first time we see the dynamic in that relationship between those two start to shift, and that's where it gets really interesting for me,
Yeah.
big time.
And you've got so many other features to Margaret's identity. Terry really plays up the new age Wiccan of her. I mean, she's learning judo now, and
Yeah,
uh, she, she's got a few other things going on. Yeah.
yeah. That, and I don't know if that kind of put me off her portrayal a little bit when I was younger, because like my mum was into all that stuff. So I found it a little bit cringy, maybe, you know. But I've come back around to it. I can definitely appreciate the joke of it a lot better now. You know, the kind of the new age Wiccan witch versus the fairy tale witch. Uh, is deployed really really well. And
Met
who
Terry.
does she learn her karate from? Do you remember?
Oh,
from Dibbler.
No. Who?
It's from Dibbler.
Oh, not
He's-
not cut me on throat. One of
Indeed, yeah.
the
She writes away to get a book, and the book is written by Lobsang Dibbler with his address in Ankh-Morpork. So it's
So
Dibbler's
do you think
grifts.
this has cut me on throat?
Oh, for sure, yeah. So Dibbler's grifts have reached the Ramtops. You know, he's doing correspondence courses and things that he knows nothing about.
Of course, and this is one of the feminine equivalents of Charles Atlas made a man out of me.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Uh,
Donnelly self-help books with
I actually think,
Griff.
now obviously, as we always do, I'm cribbing this from the annotated Discworld, which is on lspace.org, as I'm sure all the fans will know. But yeah, I think it's a reference to a real kind of con artist, Lobsang Rampa, who pretended to be a Tibetan monk and wrote this like self-help book or whatever. So he's very Dibbler. So this is definitely a reference, you know, and he's definitely a Dibbler character. So yeah, even when he's not in the book hustling, he's still hustling. Gotta respect that.
As I mentioned earlier, there's so much of this book is detail. I mean, this because there's not a lot of plot in this section.
Mhm.
It's all the substance. So a couple of little quotes, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
This is from Nanny. Tempers fugget means that was then and this is now.
Yeah.
And
I think you have to lean on fuck it though, because they use it as like a swear word, like, ah, fuck it. You know?
tempers fugget.
Yeah.
And from Granny, shut up. Anyway, she's not compassed mental.
It's another good one. And what is it? Yeah, the non comp what is the actual Latin for that? I don't even know. Because all I can think
Compass mentis.
yeah, all I can think of is compost mental. It's great.
So the big one was the Dwarf King's mines and the trapped miners and uh, sorting that out by turning the rocks into pumpkins
Yeah.
from the first wave of the wand.
Yeah, I felt that there was more going to be more kind of magical hijinks with the wand along the way, but in retrospect, I'm kind of glad there wasn't. Like it's it works fine in this set piece, but you don't want every set piece to be solved by pumpkins, I guess.
Right,
Yeah, it
it's
was
a sonic screwdriver problem, isn't it?
exactly, yeah.
And it's I think Magrat doesn't quite know how to use it, or is using
I think
it.
Desiderata mentions in her notes that it has a habit of resetting to pumpkins, and yeah, and Magrat doesn't have the skills to figure out how to troubleshoot that, I guess. Just, yeah, can totally relate to that.
Shall we go on to the next section then?
Absolutely. Um, I'll do the honors, I suppose.
Yeah, go for it.
A waterfall, burning garlic, purgers in Genua, chasing bulls, riverboat gambling.
Nice
Fun
little
stuff.
line of set pieces there. The
Yeah.
scenes all very complete in themselves. The burning garlic was the only part of the book that I had a problem with. Now, what I understand it to be as I read towards the book climax, because although it was really well written, I just didn't kind of get it. But this is the burning garlic because this is the end of the vampires. There's a story's end here, and it's being placed closer to the beginning of their journey because Lilith's just playing about with her story magic and always trying to give a happy ending.
Yeah.
Um, that's right. I'm right about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not a section that necessarily stuck with me that gave me much in the way of like, quotables or whatever. And as you say, in terms of this, because this is about a 60-page section, just under, the vignettes are quite short and quite distinct. And yeah, this is one that maybe doesn't necessarily stand up on its own, but like you say, it sort of plays into the greater themes, I suppose. Because there is a bit of a balancing act going on here, like keeping Lilith alive in the background, but not tipping the hand. Like it's tricky, isn't it? So I think it's kind of serves its purpose in that regard as well.
And I think Terry's done that quite well. There's been other books where a protagonist or major plot character has kind of disappeared, maybe after the first act, only to reappear much later, and Lilith is mirroring. She's
Mm.
she's popping up, and even if it's not her directly, we get traces of it. So yeah, the burning garlic thing, I find the story confusing, but the storytelling quite clear. We've got the purges in Genua with Lilith carting various people away, bit of disappearances.
Yeah, and it's good that because I think I've mentioned it before that occasionally in other books where I've been like, we should have a bit more back and forth. We should have a bit more A and B in these books. It would help them feel a bit more coherent. So it was nice to go back. I thought, after the kind of the prologue, to touch base with like what's actually happening in Genua as well, and because it just raises the stakes, obviously, for the witches who are on their way there too. And there's a lot of exposition required over the course of the book to really fully let the reader in on like what the setup in Genua is and all the stuff about stories and what the setting and stuff. So the start drip feeding that through now is good, and I don't think that's something that he was doing quite as much in some of the previous books. So yeah, that worked great for me.
Yeah. The chasing bulls. So the witches are sat outside a Spanish style main street before a ritual where men will chase bulls down the street,
Drinking absinthe, if I recall.
drinking absinthe, getting completely toasted on absinthe, and they're not in any particular hurry to move. Now, I can't think of any particular fairy story this relates to other than the tradition, but boy, was it a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's okay because they're doing their whole kind of send up of like European holidays too, with like the postcards and all that stuff. So I think this one is just that, isn't it? So lots of fun to be had there. I was trying, yeah, I mean, you could stretch for a literary reference, I suppose, with your Ernest Hemingways and stuff like that, but I don't think it's not that book. As you say, it's fairy tales and holidays, so they're just typical. Dare we say, typical British tourists getting too drunk and
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah.
not respecting the local customs. The riverboat, then I suppose, is the kind of
Yeah. So you've got the riverboat, which is more like a cruise liner in a way. You've got your bar, restaurant, casino, cabins.
yeah. I mean, they do exist. I think those big boats that go down the Danube because it hits so many European capitals, and they're so weird because they do look like little cruise ships that have been like smooshed, made narrow. I've never been on one. My dad, I think, has been on a few. I probably got up to the same sort of hijinks that our older characters got up to on this one.
So there's where we come to one of my favorite scenes in the book, which is the conversation between Magrat and Nanny Ogg
Mm,
about Granny,
yeah,
and by now, and with Weird Sisters, Magrat is just pushed to the limit on Granny, and I think it's completely reasonable. Really do. Granny has a very set way of doing things and a tendency to steamroll over people. Magrat's trying to be independent, trying to find her way, and Granny won't listen. And Nanny is obviously is a great mediator between the two. And this conversation that they have on the riverboat really clears the air. Uh, I mean, Granny Nanny says is as like save people from a house fire or help them clear up after a flood. She's done all these sort of good deeds that she might not necessarily be known for, certainly in comparison with the sound of her voice and her big boots. It was just a really kind of yeah lovely scene. So much character work. You can really see Nanny Ogg and Magrat's perspectives in it, and you learn a lot about Granny.
yeah, for sure. And it's that generational thing, isn't it? Where Margaret, until she hears the story from Granny anyway, doesn't like fully appreciate, as you say, all the things that Granny's done, because Granny's not the type of person to blow her own horn or whatever. But that so she needs to have an appreciation. Margaret needs to have an appreciation for the experience and the skill of the older generation, but that doesn't mean that Granny should completely dismiss Magrat's perspective and Magrat's input as the kind of younger generation. So it's that classic conflict, but because Granny in particular, I guess, is such a larger than life character, I think that the way that that conversation is then kind of juxtaposed with seeing Granny in action in the card game,
Right.
you know, and you're just like, yep, this is not a person who is to be messed with. Like everything Nanny said about her is true and more. And just getting to see that play is such a satisfying scene.
Yeah,
Just,
the
just
the card game is so illustrative of Nanny's argument in the conversation,
yeah,
and Terry really takes his time with the card game.
yeah,
It goes on quite a number of pages, so that you're there, you're seeing each move being played. It would be very easy to write a scene like that off in like a couple of pages, but I think it must be about 8 or 9 pages. We're seeing Granny's every move, how she examines her cards, her opponents, and yeah, she's a shark.
yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
it's
fun.
that worth illustrating that, you know, like as I say, everything Nanny said about her is true and more. And there's just like nothing as satisfying as just seeing overconfident bad guys get their comeuppance, you know, that to hoist themselves by their own petard because it's just their greed. It's their greed as much as Nanny's skill that kind of allows them to end up giving everything back, you know, to give the broomstick and all the money back to Granny. So
Right.
yeah, great scene. Take your time with it always, like especially if you're as good at writing Granny as Terry Pratchett is. You know?
And Granny's justice. It's underhanded, but it's still justice.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that is always a big part of it, you know, with Granny and the way that Granny won't use magic to win, or she, you know, she'll never use magic to cheat or to win. You know, she that's all her part of her philosophy is like basically just allowing her enemies to beat themselves. You know, always with that headology. So yeah, it is. It's an iconic scene, and it is one of those ones where I was like, oh, I think I have read this before. Obviously, the absinthe was one that kind of got a few gears turning for me as well. But yeah, the card game, I was like, yeah, I sort of remember this. So I definitely got it at least as far as this the first time I read it. I can
Well,
sort of safely say.
it only ramps up from here. So we'll go on to the third part because there's just so much to cover. Sleeping Beauty remembers her. A wolf is trying to be human. A house with dwarfs at the door. Granny and Magrat clash again. Genua. Granny attends an execution. Nanny Ogg socializes.
Yeah, now we're starting to ramp up into that kind of classic Discworld pace where like just lots of things start to happen. And yeah, so I guess like proper fairy tale, like really tangible fairy tale things are starting to happen to the witches now. Like stuff's starting to get pretty real. So where to begin with that? The Sleeping Beauty one. Yeah, and that's another there's another nice little hint that like Lilith in the Sleeping Beauty one as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
Where when the people in the castle wake up and they recognize Granny, I thought that was good. It wasn't just like a fairy tale set piece for the sake of it. In fact, none of these are, um, with the possible exception of the dwarves. But certainly the Sleeping Beauty bit and the wolf, the little Red Riding Hood one is like it's like a H.P. Lovecraft story, man. It's
oh yeah.
terrifying.
There's so much actually going on in that. I mean, the finale is hugely resonant, but we've got quite a lot of build up to that. The conversation with the young girl and um, like trying to work out what she's been through or where she's come from and going to.
It's messed up, and it's been a while since I've been able to talk about it. But like anytime they do the kind of looking into the animal's mind thing, you know, there has been a bit of sort of body horror almost associated with those. Well, I think anyway, associated with those sections in some of the previous witches books, but it's like ramped up to 11 here because like not only is Granny experiencing a bit of body horror by going into the body of an animal, the animal is experiencing massive body horror because it's been like forced to think that it's a human, and the way that it talks and everything is just so creepy. It's so well done.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of the famous Grant Morrison Animal Man story, the
Yeah,
Coyote Gospel.
of course, yeah. Yeah, very, very similar vibes. That's it. Yeah, like can feel my skin crawling in the same way for sure. Well,
And there's
and which
that
is good. Like,
inference. Sorry, there's that inference that uh, a bit of this wolf trying to be human is stuck with Granny. There's always this inference with headology, but it seems accentuated now. And I did find myself wondering after this if it was going to uh, return.
yeah, it's a good point.
It's quite a frightening section. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does. I think you're. Yeah, part of what you're saying there is because of everything we just learned about Granny on the riverboat. And then she recoils from this so strongly. Like you know, if something can rattle Granny, then like it's serious business.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just ramps up massively here. But then the dwarves, the dwarf thing is a bit more of a comedic set piece that kind of balances it out, you know. So it is. It's really well crafted, kind of roller coaster ride. This section.
So it took me to read the Elspeth's annotations to to realize that this falling house was from this was Dorothy's house from the Wizard of Oz, falling
Uh-huh.
with the Wicked Witch. And I noticed somewhere there's also like you can line the four characters, the four iconic characters from the Wizard of Oz up against the characters in this book. I forget what the analogies are, but
So my grad is Dorothy, I guess. Would that be right? And then Granny. Granny's all about headology, so she needs a heart. So she's she the Tin Man? No, Margaret's the Cowardly Lion, surely. I don't know. Oh yeah, so Dorothy doesn't factor into it because then there's too many characters. So it's the Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow. Right. Okay. Okay. So Nanny. So yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's answers.
Please do. Yeah. I've drank too much absinthe. I can't figure it
We'd never a Discworld, honest.
out. It's been a long time. It's been since my film studies undergraduate that I would have watched the Wizard of Oz. So yeah, I'd be rusty.
Granny and Margaret are still arguing to the point where they're sort of walking. They're doing that. Would you tell such and such? I can
Yeah.
hear. And d- despite us getting that clear in the air, I think it feels justified from a character potential. Granny's still pushing her luck. Margaret's still pushing her luck. It's not quite the full blowout that we got in Weird Sisters between Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg. That was more like a battering storm, that argument. This is just really crap weather.
Yeah, it's so passive aggressive, and like that's where the comedy comes from. I mean, it's an old joke, but like Terry's the master of these kind of almost like old school sitcom kind of gags where the whole yeah, I'm not talking to the her, she's not talking to me. Tell such and such this, you know. And he does it doesn't overstay its welcome either. You know, you get a few decent hits out of it, and then they move on, which is good.
I've got down here Nanny Ogg is the glue that keeps the witches moving.
For sure, yeah, for sure. And even in previous installments where Margaret yeah, has been less kind of part of their group. Like, I think Nanny is just what drives Granny and out into the world, especially in those moments where she does get fed up with people like Margaret who just won't agree with her. Basically, she needs Nanny to kind of to be there for her to remind her like what it's all about and helping people and all that kind of stuff. Because nothing phases Nanny like Granny, except for as you say that big argument I guess in
Weird Sisters.
Weird Sisters, yeah. And that was a big moment, but you get the proper Nanny Ogg who really knows how to handle Granny in this book, don't you?
I think reading through Granny Weatherwax is probably the witch I most like, my opinion. But Nanny Ogg is the one I most like to meet.
Yeah, it's all about yeah. I think on my this being my second reading now, it's all about Nanny all the time for me now. I think you know, like Granny's the cool one. She's the cool like aloof one that you like. you think is cool when you're a teenager or whatever. And yeah, like you say, Nanny's the one that you actually just want to like sit beside the fire and drink whiskey and smoke a pipe with and just have the crack. So I think that's where I'm at kind of in my life at the moment. So
So towards the end of the section, the witches finally reach Genua, and I really like that Terry spends 6, 7 pages just giving us the color of the city, just describing it as they first try to get through the guards and then
yeah,
make their way around it. And it really feels like a bustling city, really busy place with a lot of unusual features and yeah,
I was quite
probably
surprised
city.
that yeah, I was quite surprised by the whole kind of New Orleans, Louisiana aesthetic that he went for because like we make assumptions, but like the assumption is that the Ramtops is kind of like rural Britain, rural England maybe, and then they go on holiday through what feels for the most part Western slash Central Europe. And so you assume that they're like, and then with the name Genoa as well, like you assume they're heading towards Italy,
Yeah.
and then they rock up in New Orleans, and it's cool. I love it. Like I love New Orleans, but that did surprise me.
But the
And
description isn't there's not a stereotypical or tropish New Orleans there.
no, not
You
at
can
all.
see
No.
glimpses of it, but by and large it could be any major city in
Yeah,
the
and
Western world.
it is still very much a Discworld city, so it's like it does have like a medieval European feel to it, but because it has this the voodoo culture is there and the Cajun food or the Creole food and stuff like that. It's quite an interesting mix. It got me thinking because this whole story, this is a bit of a pet theory, so strap in. Because this whole story is kind of like a meditation on fairy tales and a subversion of fairy tales, and it's set in this kind of like New Orleans-esque location. The Disney movie The Princess and the Frog, are you aware of that?
No.
I think it's like an early or mid 2000s Disney movie, and it's set in New Orleans. And there's a princess, or there's a girl who is supposedly the princess, the main character anyway, in a Disney movie is the princess, I guess. And she kisses a frog, but instead of the frog turning into a prince, the girl turns into a frog. So it's a subversion of that fairy tale trope. And I'm just starting to think like a lot of that seems kind of familiar when you read Witches Abroad. Like
Hmm.
somebody in Disney around 2005 was definitely reading some Terry Pratchett, I think, you know.
We remember Disney, we remember.
Yeah, I mean we can't do anything about it obviously because you know, they're a titan in the industry and nobody could ever take them down.
Only a
But
matter
yeah,
of time. We're coming for you.
yeah, I don't know. That feels like probably quite a deep cut reference to make because I don't think Princess and the Frog did all that well. I've got a bit of a soft spot for it actually, but yeah, I definitely saw some interesting parallels there. So I'm going to put that out there. Somebody write me in and tell me I'm wrong, or if you're a Disney lawyer, send us a cease and desist letter. I guess.
So another element of Genua comes through Jason's postcards, which I honestly thought about using as a synopsis for these, and I think would make a great travel book in her own
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah, I would love to see somebody do the pictures that she describes. Oh, pardon me. The idea that
Probably
like
wouldn't take much work.
yeah, postcards don't exist, but like Nanny just draws them herself because like just through her force of will, she brings them into being. It's great.
I get the feeling we'll see a lot of Jason down the line.
Love Jason. Yeah, but can say no more. Obviously, yeah, you just have to wait and see.
So, of course, the first thing Granny does is attend an execution, and she's got that usual sort of deadpan, heavyweight, conversational tone. It's quite unsettling that Granny has that, and also that I didn't expect her to have that when Granny's a fairly easy to define character. You
Mm.
pretty much know how she's going to react in most situations.
Yeah, I guess part of what this has all been building towards, you know, Granny, like as I say again, on the boat, and even it's only really when she gets to the fairy tale creatures in the last section that you think, oh, yeah, Granny might be out of her comfort zone here. And you see that again when she arrives in the city, and I think she pretty much knows what's going on here. and like who's behind it, or she's got a pretty good idea. It's as unbalanced as we'll ever see her, you know, knowing that she's going to have to go up against Lilith here, probably. So that's interesting. So I think that journey does kind of start here.
Yeah, it's been hinted for some time that Granny knows who's behind this.
Yeah.
This is certainly the firmest point where we can say she knows.
Mm.
But I think before that, Lilith had appeared in mirrors, possibly even in the Ramtops. Was that?
Yeah, yeah,
But
like all the
yeah,
way in the cottage, yeah. But I think there's maybe part of Granny that wants to believe that Lilith isn't behind this. But then, like when she sees the story creatures, she's like, "Oh dear." But then when she gets to Genua, she's like, "Yeah, oh dear." So there's no denying it anymore. She doesn't want it to be true, but she kind of knows that it is.
and we've got Nanny Ogg doing her rounds with Mrs. Pleasant and Mrs. Gogol, through whom we meet Legba and Saturday. Really, really interesting cast of characters. We should mention actually we're doing this recording 2 days after Halloween.
Indeed.
Um, so yeah, it feels very apt in that sense. Mrs. Pleasant, there's a great line about how characters like Natty Ogg travel in twos, and there's always one other, and Mrs. Pleasant is her missing companion. It would be great if I'm not hopeful we'll see Mrs. Pleasant again, but it would be nice to. Uh,
Yeah, I don't think I have any information to even hint at there for you, I'm afraid. And Mrs. Goggle, yeah, like, and you sort of go, right, okay, you know, this kind of like, there has been a little bit of cultural insensitivity in the series. Not a lot, but a little. But like, so writing these kind of larger than life voodoo characters who are like, I guess Haitian slash Louisianan voodoo practitioners, you're like, oh, this could go badly, but it doesn't. You know, like her influence on the story is really credible, and like there's not a lot of like over the top characterization of her, and like the fact that I think that she's presented as like their equivalent of a witch gives her kind of a credibility and a standing within the Discworld setting. You know, that she's not going to be the butt of too many sort of cultural jokes or whatever. You know, and she makes a good gumbo, which always goes down well.
it does, yeah. You get the idea that this is quite a well-respected figure who's sort of left to her own devices a bit outside town, and she won't mess with you if you don't mess with her. Um, like
Yeah.
yeah, I quite enjoyed the character of Mrs. Gogol, and
Made me hungry. I made a big pot of gumbo
yeah,
on Saturday night past just to satisfy the craving brought on by this book, but I bet you it wasn't as good. You know, my gumbo wouldn't compare to Mrs. Goggles, I don't think.
and you talked a while back about we might see a few zombies. We've seen Wendell Pooms. Now we've got um, Saturday, who I don't think does really too much at this point, apart from being a zombie.
Yeah, and it feels like a different vibe, isn't it? Because it's not the horror movie zombie that we got, you know, in the pantheon of horror monsters. Like Window was hanging out with vampires and stuff, whereas like Saturday is like a straight up voodoo zombie, and we kind of slightly different associations with that, and it builds the reveal of like where he's going. It started to be set up here, even with his name with Saturday and stuff like that. So I think it's its own thing, and it's handled really well. Like I hate to say, I don't want to say like surprisingly well. Like I'm surprised that Terry Pratchett's a good writer, but like definitely in terms of how he incorporates inspiration from other cultures, I think it's a lot more deft, you know, in this book than maybe it has been previously. So yeah, I love all this stuff, and also like I've got a bit of a soft spot for like yeah New Orleans culture and all this kind of voodoo stuff from like reading Anne Rice books when I was a kid and visiting there not too long ago and stuff like that. So yeah, I love it.
What did you find when you were there?
Lots and lots of booze. Just spent a lot of time drinking really bad cocktails and cans of Bud Light and just hanging out on in the Jazz Quarter and stuff like that. It was great. I love it. I would go back tomorrow if I could.
Much fun? Good gumbo?
Good, yeah, I love all the food. Like, yeah, gumbo, beignets, po' boys, all that stuff. Great. That's making me hungry again. The next bit, part four, by your reckoning. Ella meets her fairy godmother, the second one. Lilith's identity is revealed. The teapot helps a daring rescue. Rum, kitchen knives, and pumpkin. On Samedi Nuit More, Lilith's plans are upset. Grebo performs a daring heist. Margaret Garlic shall go to the ball. Yeah, the first line of Andy's notes is loads happening from here on in. Like, agreed.
Yeah. So right at the top, Ella and or Umbrella.
Amberella is a good
A
name.
few
That is
names.
a
Yeah.
quality parody fairy tale name. Cinders, embers. Yeah, can't beat that.
Margaret just goes round the back, gets a basin of water thrown over her. Yeah, it's a very sort of low key conversation they have across a couple of scenes. Ella just trying to unpack what's happening, and Margaret struggling to take in that there's this other major player on the
Yeah.
scene, that she's being kept in this house.
Yeah, they sort of play it that like, oh, obviously she has two fairy godmothers, but like, is that a thing? Like, I don't know if that's a thing. I think like I admire the confidence that Terry's like, well, it's a thing in my story, so it's a thing. And you're like, yeah, dude, cool, it's your book, sure. But it's not like a fairy tale thing, is it?
I think it might be actually. I mean, not in we have godmothers in real life, um,
And even
but
then,
you have
you
the evil fairy godmother and presumably the good
but,
sparkly one. So yeah,
but
there's that.
both at the same time.
Um,
Like, I'm down with it.
could
Like,
be bad duality. Yeah,
yeah, you need it for this story. And like, yeah, it really ups the stakes for Margaret here as well. And yeah, they're kind of like awkward sort of relationship where like Ella's like not that good at having a fairy godmother, and Margaret's not that good at being one. It's quite sweet actually.
yeah, and she's trying to explain to Ella how it works without quite
Because she
having
doesn't,
read the
she has
book.
no idea
There
how it
was no
works.
book. Yeah,
Yeah, it's awesome. Oh yeah, and then Legba versus Grebo,
oh
the
wow,
immovable force and the unmovable object and the irresistible
top of the
force.
force. Yeah,
The
and
nature.
that is you can feel that, you can feel the blood and the rage in that, and it's quite tense. And we see Grebo, he follows Legba to the wonderfully planted hat and the stick,
Yeah.
which comes down the line later, but it just ends with the feeling that Legba has the upper hand, and Grebo dare not mess with him.
Yeah, so I was glancing over the annotated Discworld for this. I'm not sure if it was on that or if I went down a wiki hole, but Legba is one of the Haitian voodoo characters. I don't think I'm not sure if they refer to them as gods or not, but Papa Legba is a legit force of voodoo nature.
Mm.
So that was a cool reference. So yeah.
There's a Talking Heads song about him, Papa Legba, coming open the gate.
Oh, there you go.
Um,
Yeah, I love all those. Yeah, I mean, like as I say, it's nice to see all the kind of the cultural references being used for good.
Granny has pushed her way to the Swan Pot, where we get quite an open conversation. She's trying to work out Mrs. Gogol and vice versa. And I love actually the interplay between those two very strong minds.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's mirrored almost like the Legba versus Grebo is a bit like Granny versus Mrs. Goggle, but I think we know, and we're going to find out pretty soon who is the kind of the bigger, stronger mind
Yeah.
when the
And
when the
the reveal was another great moment that Lilith is a weatherwax. Te- Actually, it's Tempest Sire, I think, is her surname. French translation of
oh
weatherwax.
yeah, because she's Lilith the Tim Skewer. Yeah, that's right. As if I know that translates, but I just know that it sounds vaguely French. That's the extent of my knowledge. So yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, very good. Yeah,
The reveal totally hit me.
again, that was
Total
another one. I
surprise.
felt
It made
I've
sense.
yeah, I felt vaguely aware of it. I was like,
Yeah.
so again, another kind of hint that I did actually manage to get quite a dent into this book at one stage, and that's a shame because I obviously kind of spoiled it for myself because I wish I'd gone into this a bit more fresh, maybe, because I think that would have been a cool twist to kind of experience properly for the first time with like my proper adult kind of brain and attention span on it. So yeah, like again though, one of those things where like the backstory of witches, where it's like it raises questions as to like what kind of child, what kind of family, like did Granny and Lilith have? Like, it's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Like who were
Yeah.
their parents? Like, and
I think there's a bit in the book on that.
very brief bit where she's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but I think she basically just implies that their mum should have been stricter with her or something like that.
She
But
was
you're like,
wanted,
yeah, you're like, but you want to know more? Yeah, I totally want to know more.
not
I
in
don't
the
know.
way that Nanny Ogg is with her shoulder dress.
That's okay. I would.
And I mean, it's such a trope to have, oh, the lead character's sister is the evil one, and but it is just made to work so well because there's,
It's a
I guess
story
there's,
about tropes, so it's fine. Like fairy tales, or
yeah,
what do they refer to fairy tales as rural legends, like the opposite of urban legends in this, don't they? So like that's the world we're in. We're totally in the world of tropes here. So like it would be weird almost if it wasn't. If there wasn't some twist, some family connection, you would feel let down.
there's so much else going on here, and also the feeling that Granny is the steamroller that no force can touch her, and
Mm.
the floodgates are just thrown open. Definitely a rug pull moment.
Yeah, and I think what part of the question that's been asked of the reader in the first half is like whether that's a good thing. Maybe is Granny like should she be reined in? I mean, we know Nanny's not going to, but like is Magrat the person to try and do that, or is this actually is it the opposite? Is this the moment where you're going to need Granny at the height of her powers, at the you know what metaphor did you use? A steamroller? Is she a do you need her like as a steamroller on full speed to kind of overcome Lilith? So I think there's quite a lot of dramatic tension there that's all built up through that first section that works really well.
Right, yeah, that pays off real nicely in the final. Well, one of my other favorite scenes in this book, which is Margaret and the sisters, and um,
They're quite
the
scary as well.
so if Terry, if as a writer is taking the reader by the hand through a darkened room and showing them all the things that are around. Here's Ella, here's the house, here's the sisters, here's Margaret, and Margaret is really vulnerable, and oh, Margaret's gonna die now. Margaret's screwed. She's not getting out of this, and it's such a really interesting way to approach horror.
Mm.
Um, in that friendly way that Terry does. It's a very friendly writing style, and now he's taking you up to a point of damnation. I mean, I felt my skin just pop when I was reading that
Yeah,
section. I was honestly scared, very scared.
yeah. The I was trying to think because I sort of thought I had a good idea of like what this conceit was. Like what animals has she turned into people here? And then I think in my head originally I was like, is it rats? But the fact that it's snakes is just so much creepier. And then when you get the description of them being kind of like unblinking and obviously unspeaking and the way that they move and stuff, like it's super, yeah, like a horror story, like you say. So, yeah, I was gonna say enjoyed that section, but enjoyed's maybe not quite the right word, but definitely find it to be effective.
Yeah, yeah. I've always had a problem with the horror genre, and I kind of don't see the point. I don't see the point in scaring readers because it just seems, if you're doing with fiction, it just seems cheap. Um, I
Yeah, I
don't,
enjoyed a lot more on
yeah,
screen than I do in literature. I'm not quite sure why that is. But yeah, but this stuff worked great. And I think like
fresh.
subtle moments of it, like yeah, I wouldn't read a whole book of that, but like when it's these moments are deployed at the right time in these stories, I think they can be super effective.
And the only thing that really could shift that is a teapot to the face.
Yeah, but that is like it is the build up and release of tension, the build up of like yeah dread, tension, and then really good comedic relief. Like that's what makes this stuff work. Like that's what elevates these books, you know. Whereas if you don't have that, if it's just all horror all the time, like you say, like what's the point, you know?
So it's how did you pronounce it earlier? Very lovely. Simedi Nuit Mort.
Samedi Nui More, I think. My French is pretty rusty, but I find if you just start dropping sounds off the end of words, you just make them sound more French. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. Definitely sounds more French to me. Yeah, and
Translates as Saturday Night Dead.
yeah, so adjectives go at the end of the sentence in French. I remember that, so I think it's like to dead Saturday night. I think is possibly slightly more accurate translation. All you French speakers out there, write in and tell me I'm wrong. Um, and yeah, I assume this is all like the kind of the Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday kind of like Louisianan Creole traditions, um, which is
That
great.
Tuesday.
Love it. But I'm really like I don't feel like I have enough understanding of the real life culture there to know like what any, if there's any gags at play here or like what the references are necessarily. Obviously the carnival that they have is Mardi Gras for sure, but for the rest of it, I'm not quite so sure.
So what we've got here is Terry handling the first of the big finales, which has been a pattern in previous books. We've got several finales, and we have the witches just dismantling Lily's plans, or so they think. Um,
Oh yes, of
Most
course.
memorable, they're sneaking into the garage to turn the horse and cart into pumpkins.
Yeah, then the reverse Cinderella, of course. Skip, we can't skip that. And what happens? What becomes of the crew of the coach? Ends up being quite gruesome.
Oh, remind
And
me.
another kind of horror movie. So they turn the footmen and the coachmen into cockroaches, or they end up being turned into cockroaches
Oh,
somehow, and Lilith steps on them. I think is what Amberella ends up telling them. So
yeah.
yeah, that kind of like I was like, oh yeah, that's quite full on for this like funny book about witches or whatever. But but it raises the stakes, and like you say, they think they've got her licked here as long as they can disrupt the story. But but they don't. Like they like Lilith is no joke. You know, she's definitely Granny's sister. It's going to take a bit more than that to kind of to scupper her plans completely. So
It's such an action sequence because you've got Nanny Ogg getting the workmen drunk. You've got Magrat scaling the drain pipes to go in and demolish the dress. There's a I don't know. I haven't seen Ocean's 11, but I imagine that's probably a version of the same story.
oh, totally. Yeah, I haven't actually seen it either. But yes, that's how I imagine it. 100%.
Um,
Yeah, and they each have their strengths to play to in that section, which is nice too.
and Grebo doesn't get ignored here as well because Granny's making him part of the plan with converting him to a human.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about that because like all that stuff creeps me out big time, as you now know. But human Grebo is just so likable, and
Yeah, I had so my other problem with this book isn't of this book. It's with Weird Sisters. We're introduced to Grebo as we're told he's a sex offender.
yeah,
Um,
oh yeah, so making
so
a human is a bit dicey. Yes, fair.
yeah, uh, the Grebo we see in this book is quite fun. Um, he's he's like very cat. He basically stops the coach, doesn't he? It's cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
there's
yeah,
an awful lot goes into this sort of false ending. It's
yeah,
meant to
yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I guess like if you've got your kind of thinking cap on and you're like they're in a fairy tale, and even the characters in the book know that they're in a fairy tale. So you're sitting there with your book in your hands, you know that there's still 40, 60 pages left. You're like, you know this isn't the end.
It's the
you,
story, right?
yeah, you know Lilith's gonna come back, and you also know that surely if you're in this fairy tale city and Cinderella is supposed to be going to the ball, or Umbrella is supposed to be going to the ball, there has to be a ball.
Yeah. And what's so crazy is that there's so much going on in these 60 pages, and the next 60 pages has a whole other wealth of story as well. It's just, whereas the first 150 pages are just moving at a very slow pace, a pleasant stroll. The last 150 are blockbuster.
Yeah, and I know it's the sort of thing that listeners probably expect me to complain about, but like I think because the character journeys are so whole, I really don't mind it in this, and I think these again, like these two kind of back to back climaxes, for want of a better word, is the sort of thing that might usually set alarm bells off for me as well. But because it's all part of this conceit of them fighting against the story.
Story, yeah, and it feels totally intentional this time.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely, yeah, completely is, and it does work because it's also a really natural escalation, and the fact that they underestimate Lilith just really sets the scene for the big sort of full fat confrontation with her that we're about to get.
Yes, stories are broken to be made.
Like it,
Yeah.
like it. It's a good tagline. Yeah, in fact, like a lot of the stuff that he's doing with story and ruminating about the nature of story and how people interact with stories and how important stories are to the human experience. Like we've touched on it before, like he has been noodling with it a little bit here and there, and it's always been one of the big themes of Discworld for me. Like if you ask me what Discworld's about, it would be one of the things that I would start waffling about for sure, from a thematic point of view. And I think this is the first book where it's articulated so wholly. Well, I mean, I guess Moving Pictures does it.
Yeah, moving pictures does do it. I
Yeah,
thought it was quite like the way Lilith's plan is treated is that like story is like a for her a scientific force, like gravity. Things move a certain way,
yeah,
and are structured a certain way, and that's the spell she's putting out there. And I think he got a fair bit of mileage out of that. It's just really interesting.
yeah. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think in Moving Pictures, it's like the conceit is that the stories are manipulating the people, but in Witches Abroad, Lilith, a person, is trying to manipulate the stories. She wants to be in control of the story. She wants to make everything perfect through turning people into story characters,
Right,
essentially. So I think,
she's a set idea of how that plays out.
yeah.
Very,
So
very
how,
typical trope.
yeah. So like all these different ways that he can come at that concept, I think it's so interesting and it's something that like, yeah, it's really stuck with me. And there's so many different ways to attack it across the series. He obviously felt that there was like a lot to be said about it too. So yeah, I love that stuff.
Let's go into the final part, then we can look at the ball properly.
Do it, do it,
Um,
do it.
so Margaret Garlick shall go to the ball. Bedroom of flies, new clothes and dance cards, meddling with clockwork. The swamp, man and gods, Grebo in the kitchen, Nanny Ogg's feet, jail, Mrs. Gogo versus Granny Weatherwax. There's so much. There's so much.
Keep going.
Life and death come to Saturday. Esme, Lily, and Mirrors. The long way home.
Indeed. Yeah, the whole ball set piece. Like there's a bit of upstairs, downstairs stuff going
Yeah.
on. Like you say, there's all the goings on in the ballroom, but then there's got Grebo in the kitchen, and you've got Casananda, which is I think he's at the peak of his like comedy names in this one, because Amberella and Casananda are two of my favorites.
Is
Isn't
none. reference to?
So it's under instead of over. So instead of casting over,
Ah,
casting under. Eh, eh, eh.
Jing.
It's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah, and I don't think that's one that hit me the first time I read it. It hit me this time. I laughed out loud.
The bedroom full of flies, and what we don't learn till later is a pond,
Yeah,
revealing that the Duke is a frog.
again, like big Princess and the Frog vibes, except like a bit more. Yeah, some of his slight horror story vibes in that section where you're like, oh god, what have they stumbled into something kind of horrific here? Like, is it his grave or what is it? But no, it's just a pond. But yeah, it's a nice little
They're
twist.
certainly a bit rattled by it. Um, and then we get the stealing of clothes, and I think I would like this to be a continuing feature in witches books. That they certainly steal things. I think that's a reasonable explanation, a reasonable.
Yeah, they
Uh,
appropriate things. It's not stealing if you need it for important business.
okay.
I don't think Granny has ever paid for anything in her whole life, but I don't think she considers herself to be a thief. But
Um,
Nanny getting dolled up for the ball, even Migrat getting dolled up for the ball is uh, is comedy in that for sure.
yeah, is it? It's really only Nanny who is comfortable
Oh yeah,
in that. That's her element. She's a socialite
yeah, she's like there for the drinks and the canapes and all that good stuff.
until she's climbing into the clockwork mechanism, and I thought that point was wholly well described. You've got the cobwebs and the cogs that won't move, and Casanunda's in there.
Yeah, and the and it's an important kind of part of the fairy tale, isn't it? Because for Cinderella slash Emberella, it's like that part of the story ends when the clock strikes midnight. So it's just like, all right, just get in there and make it happen. Very kind of practical witch way of dealing with things, you know. And
And
then,
talking about keeping plates spinning, you've still got stuff going on with Mrs. Gogol and Saturday in the Swamp. And it's one of my favorite scenes in it.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
actually going to be one of my quotes later, where she's talking about uh, gods and man, and it's simply wonderful writing, and it's it it goes on for a few pages, so I can't quote the whole thing. Um, yeah, it's just awesome. Really appealed to me.
yeah, for sure. That undercurrent of like religion and belief and what that means in Discworld. Like you say, there's some really well expressed thoughts on that here, and you start to get a feeling that they're gonna have quite an important part to play in this finale. Like they're not just there to kind of ease Granny and the witches into this part of the story and to help them save the day. That they've got their own moves that are going to be made, and this is kind of the start of it here.
Nanny Ogg's feet. That's her trying on the socks, and or sorry, talking about hairy socks, trying on the shoes and find that she fits
The glass slippers, yeah,
glass slipper. So all of a sudden, Nanny joins the other two players as, absolutely pivotal to the plot. She's been a very pivotal by character element until now, but now it's just
yeah,
taken on a new thing. She is a um, uh, wrench in Lily's scheme.
yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, the whole kind of business of Magrat having to step into Ella's place and be the object of the. You can tell that he wants you to pronounce it duck because there's a few duck jokes,
Yeah.
so you have to say duck. Yeah, so she's meant to be the object of the duck's affection. So yeah, so then they're all, like you say, they're all then intrinsically kind of linked to the action here in the finale. Um, yeah, so he's a duck who turns into a frog. That's the gag, isn't it? Yeah. Well, they both live in ponds, so maybe that's okay.
I like that this isn't. I don't know which character comes out with it. Probably Granny or Nanny. That this isn't the first time they've been in jail.
Yeah, sure. I think they've been in jail in the books, haven't they? Like they
The
end
young
up in
weird, it
jail
probably
one
weren't
way or so.
young weird sisters, but I reckon there's been countless appearances where they've been
I,
knocked
I
up,
think
kind
so.
of.
They're not phased by it. Yeah.
It's just another excuse to write a postcard to Jason.
Well, can't get enough of those. Yeah. And then death. Even like everybody's here. Even death is here at the
Yeah,
ball.
so let's talk about that. Death's being used really sparingly here. There's probably by this point been two appearances, and they've both been walk-on parts, and they've
Yeah.
both maybe been in these last sort of 50 pages or so.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I really like that. I think you can see too much of Death sometimes.
Yeah.
And when he just springs up, and I had completely forgotten about him, and then he just pops up.
He
Uh,
hasn't forgotten about you, Andy. Don't
he
worry.
hasn't. So yeah.
And we know death loves a party, don't we? From our
Oh
experiences with
yeah,
those
he
books. So
likes
like,
his wine and cheese.
yeah. So when the hors d'oeuvres are out, yeah, he's never going to be too far. So yeah,
He's one
and,
for his
and
lot of
because
them.
yeah, and because it's a masquerade ball, obviously, because we're going. And I think that's maybe why I got the action of these books confused. But everybody's wearing a mask, so every time they see death, they're like, "Oh yeah, great mask." It's like such an easy joke, but like I don't know, it gets me. It does. It tickles me every time.
Yeah, there is a bit of certainly genetic sort of similarity between the finale Weird Sisters and Witches Abroad, but I don't really mind it. It's fine. It's certainly helped by the fact that this book is about story, so
Well, yeah, I guess, and that
and there's just such wonderful three characters.
yeah, you love spending time with them, and like as you said at the start, the last book is kind of a Shakespeare riff, and Shakespeare's stories are so iconic and so familiar, and then this is a fairy tale riff, which are also stories that are iconic and familiar. You inevitably are going to end up, I guess, with a little bit of overlap in those narratives, but like yeah, like you say, you don't mind. They're such enjoyable characters to spend time with, and then yeah, that final reveal where Saturday is the Baron, the previous ruler, and like just the tone of that feels, and the how it's revealed does feel sort of texturally different enough for me. I know you've had your Lilith sister reveal, so you're not necessarily expecting another twist.
Yeah.
But I like the way all that was wrapped up, and that how they became so important to the finale, and that there, and as I said, with like the cultural sensitivity, the fact that Mrs. Gogol is then revealed to be kind of the right hand person. She's in a relationship with the former Baron, so she's going to be a person of power. She's not just this crazy lady who lives in the swamp. She is a person of real influence and real power within that society. I think all really helps.
Yeah, it makes her both more political and emotional at once, that the
Yeah,
relationship that she has with Saturday.
yeah, because they murdered him. Like Lily murdered him essentially. So this whole thing has been her kind of orchestrating her revenge, almost like drawing the witches to Genua so that they could help her overthrow Lilith and the duck. Lilith and the duck. That's a good band name.
And looking back, like it's not presented in that order, but it really informs her conflict with Granny, which comes
Mm.
before that and reaches ahead, and it's a point where you don't quite know if Mrs. Gogol is particularly on your side anymore, or if she ever was.
Yeah, it's nice to keep that tension alive all the way through into the finale, and you're wondering are they going to have to kind of throw down with each other before Granny then has to go on into conflict with Lilith. So yeah, I thought that was really well done too, and the just all the kind of it's a power struggle. It's a kind of a three-way power struggle then, isn't it? And Granny has really clear ideas about, especially like how magic should be used in these situations. But you feel that the fact that she's not willing to use magic in the same way as Lilith or Mrs. Goggle, that should put her at a disadvantage. But we know Granny, and we know that she can hold her own anyway. But yeah, how all that's all set up and paid off is tremendous.
Yeah, Mrs. Gogol comes in with a doesn't come in with a big gun. She comes in with a tank. Like
Yeah,
Saturday, like I was going to say fire and lasers, but he's channeling lightning, and um,
Yeah, it's
he's
the
got
was
that
the
godly sort of quality to him.
yeah, he's the Baron Samedi character, I guess, with the top hat and the
Oh, the
fancy jacket
dance! Oh, his dance!
and the dance.
That's
Yeah,
so much.
yeah.
Mwah.
So great stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that just bringing that energy that we associate with that kind of culture, in a way that does certainly to me anyway feel like quite affectionate and quite authentic and stuff is yeah, it's delightful. With all this, like you say, this is packed in, and you're kind of wondering with all the stuff that's set up between Lilith and Granny, like what kind of ending is going to satisfy between these two. But I think how it's handled is really good. With the
yeah.
mirror.
I'm not sure I got what I was. Oh, well, there's a quote. I'm not sure I got what I want. Maybe I got what I need.
There you
Um,
go. That's good
isn't that what
storytelling right
it is?
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we get it's a sort of, well, percentage wise, it's very much an emotional resolution, I think. Because Lily is kin, and that's how Granny is gonna deal with her.
Mm. Yeah, you feel like she can't be as ruthless, perhaps, as she would otherwise be, even though she recognizes Lilith as this major threat. And there's something really interesting at play in how they each deal with being trapped in the mirror, I guess, which sort of is like the final word on their characters for this book, where like they're left looking for the true version of themselves, the true reflection, and Lilith is going to essentially spend eternity in this infinite room of mirrors trying to find her true reflection. Whereas Granny knows simply to just look down at her real body and says, there I am, this is me. She's so comfortable and confident in her own identity that
Right.
that's what allows her to be freed from the mirror. And
Whereas Lilith has spent all her time looking and lining up hundreds of mirrors, looking into them.
yeah, she's
She's
always
a
one.
narcissist.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, she's seeking a perfection that doesn't exist. Whereas Granny is able to kind of accept herself for who she is. And I don't think that is actually something that's made like super clear about Granny up until that moment. It's certainly hinted at, I suppose, in the way that Nanny talks about her on the boat and whatnot.
I think Terry undersells a bit what he's doing in that scene. It felt very much like, oh, here we go. Granny and Lily are going into a variant of the dungeon dimensions. But then it just the Lily not being lost and Granny choosing the way out so quickly. It yeah, speeds through that section. So I think he probably could have got a bit more mileage out of it. But I mean, you've got it. You explained it to me. So
You're
uh,
right though, but I mean, you're right in that it could be juiced a little bit more maybe. But I guess because it's not like a rinse win style Dungeons Dimension set piece. He's maybe wondering like how many pages can you get out of like a couple of old ladies looking in the mirror. But I mean,
yeah,
if anybody can, Terry Pratchett can. So yeah, I liked it. I have to say. Um, in the past I've been a little bit down on those kind of Dungeons Dimension Z finales. So like yeah, anything to mix that up kind of works for me. Especially anything where Granny just wins by just with the headology, just by doing the simplest kind of thing.
um, so I can't think of anything else to say about this within our time limitations. I really enjoyed the supporting cast. I thought all of them were really well rounded, integral to the story. I would happily spend more time with them. There were only about six main supporting characters.
Yeah, certainly in the Genua section. I mean, all the kind of little vignettes were all perfectly serviceable, and more so on the way in. But yeah, in terms of that, the main fairy godmother storyline, I totally agree. Like even like the snake sisters, all that stuff, I thought was really well realized.
I think I said earlier I give this one. Yeah, I had a blast with it. The grumps were below 2%. Grade A.
Like
Yeah,
that this like arbitrary like marking system has just been introduced on like book
yeah.
12 or something.
I checked the marking criteria.
Yeah, for me, yeah, I would say similar marks. Any kind of slowness in my kind of starting to enjoy it, in the opening section was just like purely my own kind of reservations. So I would also give it a grade A. Um, but
Talking about grading, I made a note to look into academia produced around Discord. You know the way, um, Whedon-esque, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer just spawned so many literary papers, and I'm
yeah,
just
there are quite
wondering
a
what
few, I
we
think.
have out there on Discord. Have you
Yeah,
read any of these, or
I mean, what?
been on
Yeah, I
them?
mean, people post them, or even sometimes the authors will post them on Reddit the all time, so we could do a bit of a dive. My access to JSTOR and all that stuff is not currently active, unfortunately. So I'm unable to do a deep dive, but it's something that I would be interested in doing in the future for sure.
I will see if I can find out as well. Um, if you're aware of any, send us some. Um, Particularly any recommendations if you've authored a paper yourself. Definitely, we'll give it a shout out. So I really be keen to read those. Shall we go into any favorite quotes and bright spots?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I mentioned earlier Magrat and the sisters. Certainly a bright spot scene. Another one's Magrat and Nanny Ogg. It's going to form my first part of my first quote.
Go for it.
It's just such a tough one because, as I said, every page has something awesome on it. Nanny and Magrat talking about Granny in a riverboat. You'd have to go a long day's journey to find someone basically nastier than Esme, said Nanny Ogg. And this is me saying it. She knows exactly what she is. She was born to be good, and she don't like it.
That's an absolutely tremendous quote. It sums up that character so well. And like,
Such
it,
beautiful writing, yeah.
it is such beautiful writing, and it's like it's not just good in. I mean, it doesn't just flow well. It's not just beautiful writing. It's such unique and effective character description. Like Granny is such a well realized, she's such a good character, and it's rare to be able to like just nail a, a short description like that of such a good character to the wall in like a couple of sentences, and that's I'm so jealous of that kind of writing. Like, I so am. It also just reminds me of a point I wanted to make. I think actually maybe the last time we read one of these books, which is that like all the like stereotypical old lady names in the witches books, like Esme and Lily, like all my daughter has like friends with these names now. Like all these names have come back. These are like little girls' names now, and it messes with my head a little bit. That's just a stray observation.
It's a legacy.
Yeah, but these things they go in cycles, I guess, don't they? So we're back. We've got little Esmes and little Liliths running around. Certainly lilies. I don't know if I know any Liliths. I definitely know a few lilies. Um, anyway, right, I'll do a quote, will I? I've got
Yeah.
one actually locked and loaded for a change without having to scramble. And it's a bit of a cheat because, as you say, all this is a book chock full of memorable moments. So I wanted to pick something from quite early on, which is artists and writers have always had a rather exaggerated idea about what goes on at a witch's sabbat. This comes from spending too much time in small rooms with curtains drawn instead of getting out in the healthy, fresh air. So it just tickles me.
He's got our
But
number.
yes, oh, 100% he does, yeah. And I imagine it comes from a bit of personal experience on
Yeah.
his point as well. Uh, it just tickled me on the reading of this book because I'm working on a radio documentary about devil worship and witchcraft and stuff at the moment. So it just I've been looking at a lot of like books and diagrams of like what people imagined was going on during these various satanic panics and stuff. And it's like, yep, you know what, you're right. It all comes from people spending too much time in small rooms with their curtains drawn. So yeah, I'll hopefully be able to share a bit more information about that in a few months. But it's been good fun. Definitely very illuminating. and having a Terry Pratchett witches book to read alongside it has helped keep me a little bit sane. So it's been good.
Cool plug. Cool plug. And just while we are plugging, I'm working on
Plug
a
away.
schlock horror series based on TV of the 1990s.
Awesome.
Um, and I'm working on a story in about the moral panic around backward masking and concealed messages and music. So that is a lot
Class.
of fun to write. Yeah, and the demonic recording studios and stuff. So yeah,
There's
I'm going to do
there's
me
something
up.
in the air. Yeah, it's interesting that we've both kind of got projects going on that kind of relate to this stuff, man. There's something in the air for sure.
I'm going to do my other favorite quote. Well, I'm going to do a segment of it. This is Mrs. Gogol
Oh yeah.
considering the relationship between people, class, and God. Stories are not, on the whole, interested in swineherds who remain swineherds, and poor and humble shoemakers whose destiny is to die, slightly poorer and much humbler. When all people had was practically nothing, then anything could be almost everything. The invisible people knew that happiness is not the natural state of mankind and is never achieved from the outside in. It's just three short quotes across those pages. Um,
Yeah, it's good stuff. You can sort of feel, hopefully without too many spoilers incoming, we can sort of feel that there's like maybe a kind of a longer rumination on that stuff, especially from the kind of religious angle, maybe forming, bubbling away at the back of his mind there.
yeah, I've got a feeling that too. And I'm looking forward to discussing that stuff at a bit more length when we get there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and it's not far off either. I don't think. I haven't looked at the old list for a while. Oh, I've got it. I suppose if I just go back to the quotes page, I think is an alpha or the publish order, isn't it? Yeah, it's next. Yeah, Small Gods is next. Let's not be coy
Small
about
Gods is
it.
next.
Small Gods is next. So
Small
yeah,
Gods is next. Ooh.
you can see that kind of that stuff's all bubbling away under the surface already.
Well, before we get to Small Gods, we've got a very special episode next on casting. PJ and I, at the prompting of our regular mailer Roasty Buns, are going to discuss our ideas for casting Discworld. So that's going to be a thing.
Yes,
It was a
we
great show, wasn't it?
had a lot of fun doing that. You know, the TV world that I kind of inhabit most of the time in my day job, was able to kind of just rely on a lot of my indulge a lot of the kind of interest that I have in like fan castings and real castings and thinking about projects that would work and projects that wouldn't work in Discworld. It's a debate that's been going on forever in the fandom, and you know we've had a few adaptations, some with good casting, some without. But I think every fan has their own ideas, so it was a lot of fun to just kind of kick back and kick some of those around.
Yeah, yeah. It really did get me thinking, and I put quite a bit of work together in the video component of that.
You
So
certainly
do
did,
check
yeah.
that out if that's your bag.
What I love about it, and I don't even think I said this at the time, but like you could cast Discworld so many different ways, and you wouldn't be wrong. Do you know? Like you do it like so differently. You could take so many big swings and still come out with something really, really unique and funny and incredible. So I believe there are, you know, I believe from what I've heard, kind of what the industry buzz is anyway, is that Narrativia, which is Rihanna Pratchett and Rob's company, um, you know, they have some big-ish things in the works in terms of future adaptations. You know, they had their Morris the Cat adaptation come out Christmas past, and it was received pretty well. So yeah, we hopefully get to see some of these roles get cast for real. You know, not just theoretically by onlookers like us. You know, so it's exciting times.
Very exciting. So before we go, I just want to say a few special thanks to my top patrons who helped put this together in terms of the money coming in. Thanks so much to Arslan Hyder Ali, Art K, and particularly Ian Lawther, who goes halvers on the bills with the software that we use for recording these shows. So our casting special, December 2023, and just while we're live now, PJ and I would like to wish you a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we've got something even bigger planned for our first episode in the new year. Shh.
Oh, that's a good point. It actually might be a little while before we get around to Small Gods. So yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned for some news on that. What might be happening in January. It'll be exciting for us. Hopefully, it'll be exciting for you as well. So we will speak to you again then, I suppose.
It's
Happy
been great
Hogs
spending
Watch.
time with you as usual, PJ, and yourselves, audience.
Likewise.
Orson, thank you so much. We've read some Discworld.
And I
Yay.
can now say for sure I've read this particular Discworld. I wasn't sure before. Now I am.
Oh, have I ever?
Class.